Hello, and welcome to the Harris School webinar on crisis management with Daniel Diermeier. My name is Terry Brady, and I'm the Executive Director of Professional Development here at the Harris School. Before we begin, I want to make a few brief comments and then introduce our guest. There'll be two people speaking today. You'll hear my voice and our guest. Other participants will be muted. We would like you to participate today, however, by asking questions, and to do that, please type a question in the chat box, but you should do that in a private chat box to me. That's where you should put your questions. I'll keep track of them and we'll have time for them near the end. Our presentation will last for about 60 minutes. Our guest will present first, and then we should have 20 to 25 minutes for questions from you. This webinar is being recorded and we'll make it available on our Harris alumni website. On behalf of the Harris School, I want to thank you all for joining us. We know you have a lot of challenges and demands for your time and attention right now, so we really appreciate your interest. I'm very pleased to introduce our guest, Daniel Diermeier. He's the David Lee Shillinglaw Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago and the incoming Chancellor of Vanderbilt University. Until recently, he served as the Provost of the University of Chicago, and before that, we were very fortunate to have him as the Dean of our Harris School of Public Policy. Daniel is a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Canadian Institute of Advanced Research. Welcome, Daniel, and thank you so much for talking to us today about crisis management during COVID-19.
Thank you. So first of all, welcome all of you. That we have a large group, and I'm very pleased that you could find the time to spend an hour to think about the leadership challenges associated with COVID-19. I hope that you and your family are doing well. I know these are very unusual circumstances for everyone, and I just hope that you know, within these kind of very difficult environments, that you can take good care of yourself and your loved ones. We all have different backgrounds and different challenges, and they are, of course, have to depend very strongly to what your leadership roles are right now and what you're dealing with. Dealing with a school is something very different than with a government agency or in the private sector, or of course, in my case, when we're dealing with a university, they are complex institutions that require a lot of very fast operational responses as we are dealing with these very fast-moving and challenging environment. So what I want to do today, I want to focus on the common leadership challenges that I think we all are facing as we're dealing with the specific difficulties in our specific role. So what I will do is I'm going to pull up some slides. I'm going to share them with you. I'm going to talk about for 25, 30 minutes or so. And at that point, we're going to open it up for questions. As Terry said, just make sure that you send a chat message to Terry Brady, who's identified as the host in your chat box. Let me pull up my slides here. And my focus really here is on the leadership challenge. So whenever you deal with these types of challenges, you want to ask yourself, what's different? What makes this particular situation unique? And what are its specific leadership challenges that you're going to have to deal with? So what I would say is that when I'm thinking about COVID-19, and some of these observations apply to other similar challenges, public health crisis, but also natural disasters and terrorist attacks. The first thing that you have is you have a tremendous amount of uncertainty. I think that's obvious to everyone. The estimates about, you know, the mortality of the pandemic are changing. The facts on the grounds are literally changing as we make decisions. And what that does, it makes it very difficult for us to use the usual data-driven analytical approach that, of course, the Harris School stands for in this particular leadership environment. Well, that's the first thing I think that makes this very unique and very difficult. Number two is the amount of fear. And we haven't really seen, I don't think we have seen panic yet, but we certainly have seen a tremendous amount of fear and emotional upheaval associated with COVID-19. Again, that can happen in other crises too, but it is very pronounced and very profound in the current environment. And then the third aspect, and that's, as I said before, is shared with terrorist attacks or natural disasters, is that we are coming together as a community. And this coming together as a community in these type of situations, interestingly presents specific leadership challenges that we also have to deal with. So I'm going to go step by step through these different challenges, and I'm going to provide a set of tools for you that then you can use in order to be able to deal with them more effectively as leaders. So here's my first tool. I'm going to call this tool the Truss Trader. The Truss Trader is based on extensive research on what shapes and influences trust. And the reason why this is so absolutely crucial is because for you to be effective as leaders in this environment, you're going to have to be able to maintain a high level of trust with your respective stakeholders and constituency, and also with your own people. Now, who that is and who you have to worry about will vary. If you run a school, that's one aspect. If you run a government agency, something else. If you work in the private sector, you have to deal with clients, that's yet something else. In a university context, of course, it's the students, it's the parents, it's the faculty, and so forth. So think about them broadly. The challenge is that typically the way we maintain trust is we engage based on data and analysis. But we don't have that available. If people ask us, how long will this last? We can't answer. If we ask them, how big would the economic impact? We can't answer. When the question is, what will you have to do in July if we're not open yet? For example, if you're a school and you can't open in the early fall, we don't have an answer for that. So in those environments, trust and the ability to maintain trust is absolutely essential. Now, what you will see and what this tool is about, it will give you the ability to maintain trust, even though you do not have an answer yet. In other words, you may not know what the answer to any one of these questions is, but what you can do is you can act and communicate in a way that makes it possible for you to maintain or enhance the trust with your key constituents. So the first factor that I want to talk about, you see that in the Trust Radar on your right, is transparency. And the way you want to read this chart is as follows, or this little figure is, every one of these factors is associated with increased trust, but you have to do it the right way. So I'm going to start with transparency. I'm going to talk about expertise, commitment, and empathy. So transparency. Transparency is not about full disclosure. Transparency is about something else. Transparency is about understanding what's in the head of your relevant audience and addressing their questions to the extent that that these audiences expect them to be addressed. So what I mean by that is that what a parent wants to know, or what an individual average citizen wants to know, is very different than what a regulator wants to know, or what a professional policymaker wants to know. So you need to ask yourself, what are the specific questions in the mind of my audience? How do I address them? What do I know? What do I not know? And then the third piece is, sometimes you may have information that, but that you can't share. This is particularly important in the current context when we have to do with patient privacy information. People may want to know, for example, in a university or in a school context, what's the name of the affected student, but you can't talk about that. So, so the typical approaches is, what do you know? Don't go beyond what you don't know. It's perfectly fine in this environment to tell people that there are aspects that you don't know and to be clear about them, but do not go beyond what you don't know. And then if there is information that you want to share or that you can't share with your audience, give an explanation that resonates with people. Now, the important piece here, and I'm going to use privacy as my example, is that the way you communicate with people makes sense to them. This is hard for people that are specialists and experts because they're so used to dealing with the subtleties. But if you are using language that people don't understand and that does not connect with what is top of mind for them, you will not be understood, and you can't be trusted if you're not understood. Example, you may not be able to share information about the status of a patient because of HIPAA requirements. But when you communicate, you do not want to say, I can't talk about them because of HIPAA requirements, because most people have no idea what HIPAA is. Much better to say, we cannot share this information because patient privacy is of paramount importance for us. We protect your privacy, we protect every patient's privacy, hence we cannot share this information. So what you're doing there is you're giving a reason that people understand and that resonates with them. The more you are an expert on something, the more easy it is to forget what makes sense to you does not necessarily make sense to the audience. So that's transparency. 2 is expertise. So expertise means that people have an expectation that you know what you're doing. If you want to pick a dentist, you want to pick a good one. You want to pick an accountant, you want to pick a good one. You will not pick or listen to somebody who has no credibility. So that's the good news. For now, there are some interesting challenges and subtleties here that vary from area to area. So first, in the United States, businesses usually are expected to, or the public's expectation of expertise for businesses in the United States is high, meaning that we expect them to be able to deal with problems. If they can't deal with problems, we usually blame their intent rather than their lack of competency. A great example of that is cybersecurity. So if there's a data hack, we do not feel sorry for the company or excuse them because they were subject of a malicious attack by well-informed and motivated hackers, but we blame the companies that they didn't protect the privacy or the data of their customers enough. So the expectations for companies are very high. If there is a sense that you can add something to that expertise, bring third parties in. For nonprofits, that's not true to the same extent. Nonprofits are not seen as competent on these kind of general business issues than businesses. So to put it differently, if the Red Cross had been hacked, people are more forgiving than if General Motors had been hacked. Now, however, that does not apply if it is your core competency. So the Red Cross will be forgiven for a cyber attack, but it will not be forgiven for contaminated blood supply. So on your core competency, you have to be strong, but on the broader concern, people give you a little bit more slack than they give businesses. Sorry. Governments, agencies are somewhat in the middle, depends on their reputation. The reputation of the FBI or FEMA is very different. And as a consequence of that, our expectations about their expertise will vary as well. The general point is, even if you believe you have a level of expertise, but the public does not believe it, adding some third party, for example, utilizing your board in that way can be very effective, is essential. Now, in the context of COVID-19, because it's so unusual and because the challenges are so profound, the expectations that you can handle this effectively are not very high. But what people will expect that you're able to handle your specific purpose, your specific mission. So again, I'm using university as an example. We will still have to be able to provide grading and provide class contents. There's an understanding it's not going to be in the same level, but there's still an expectation that what we do as an organization, we're going to do well. That's expertise. So again, the expectations will vary. The strategy to deal with that, if there's a gap between expectation and what you can deliver right now, add some third-party experts in there in order to go where you need to go. The next one is commitment. Commitment is about finding a solution to the problem. Now notice, you may not know what the solution is, how long it would last, and what it actually means to have a solution. That's common during crisis. It's super important right now in the context of the COVID-19 example. So so there are two approaches that help with respect to increasing trust via commitment. The first one is that you want to have a process in place. It's a very good idea to let people know about what you're actually doing, how you're getting somewhere. Some people have ad hoc teams or they have board committees. Communicate this to your people and to your key stakeholders so that they have a sense that you know what you're doing process-wise, even if you don't have an answer. The second important technique is what I'm going to call make it personal. People want to hear during a crisis of this magnitude, people want to hear from the person in charge. It can't be a spokesperson. It has to be the person that makes the decisions. That's what people want to hear from. And the more personal and the more connected you can make it to yourself, the more authentic you can make it, the better. The last example or the last dimension here is what I'm going to call empathy. Empathy is about connecting with people's emotional state, with their fears, with their concerns for themselves and for their family. This is sometimes overlooked by executives because their tendencies on solving the problem, on finding a solution. But again, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you connect with the personal side as authentic as you can. This is a time when period need to be realized when your people, especially your own people, not just your external constituencies, but your own people need to be reassured. Show them that you can connect with them as a person. Very important. So that's number one, that has to do with the trust and the lack of uncertainty component. The second component has to do with fear, what I call the emotional dimension. It is obvious that this is a terrifying situation for many people, that the fear is very high. And so how do we deal with that? And again, that can be your external constituents, your parents, the people that you serve, if you work in a hospital, the people that are your patients, or it can be your own people, your own staff, your own team, same thing. So what do we know from here is that the way people perceive the risk of a situation, the subjective assessment of risk and the objective risk is very, very different. It can be higher, it can be lower. So people overestimate the risk or they underestimate the risk. So I'll give you one example. One reason why SUVs are so popular is because people are much more afraid of being hit by another car in an accident than a rollover. When you look at fatalities in the United States, roughly, that's not exactly correct, but roughly, half the fatalities are because of rollovers or driver-induced accidents, and half of them are due because people are being hit by another car. But people are very much more worried about being hit by another car than they're rolling over. And the reason for that is because when you have a sense of control, when you're at the wheel, people underestimate the risk and they overestimate the risk, comparatively speaking, of being hit by somebody else, because that's associated with a sense of powerlessness. More generally speaking, there are factors or characteristics of a situation that increase the level of fear or the level of subjective risk perception. I picked 5 of them. There are a couple of others, but those 5 are most relevant in the context of COVID-19. Novelty, something that is new, we haven't seen that before. Dread, that means the consequences are bad, death or very severe illness. Identifiable victims, once people have identifiable victims, their sense of fear to themselves goes up. Salience, that means if it's highly prominent in media coverage. And 5, that's related to what I was just talking about, a sense of powerlessness, that there's nothing you can do about it, you're just being a victim. This literature originated in the context of nuclear power, and the scientists at the time and the policymakers were puzzled why people were so worried about nuclear power, even though the objective risk, according to the scientific community, were quite low. Well, you can go through the 5 of them and you see it. It was novel. People were hadn't gotten used to nuclear power. The consequences of, like, death by radiation, for example, are extremely dreadful. There was a concern about identifiable victims. Think about, an individual that we heard, salience, and so forth. So if you now apply this to a COVID-19, you see, of course, all 5 of them are present. Novel, dreadful, victim, salience, powerlessness. So what that means is that people's level of fear will typically be considerably higher than what's warranted by the objective risk that they're facing. Now, it doesn't help to tell people that. because that's particularly true for people that are not very familiar with statistical arguments. So rather what you have to do is you have to try, or one thing that you can do is, can you influence any one of these 5 factors? Well, the one that I think where one can do something, can't do much about novelty, dread, identifiable victims, or the level of media coverage, but we can do something about powerlessness. So what I would recommend to you, and that's particularly true about your own team, the more you can create a sense of agency about participation, the better. So what that does, just to be clear, if you give people a chance to participate, to volunteer, to do something positive, not only will that have a direct benefit to the community, but it will reduce the level of fear because it creates a sense of agency. In the UK, there was a great example. The NIH asked volunteers, we're hoping to get 200,000, they got almost 500,000. And these people, once they participate, now overcome their sense of powerlessness. They participate, and as a consequence of that, their personal perception of fear goes down. So look for opportunities in your own team or the constituent you serve where people can do something, where they can participate, where they have a sense of agency. Last piece and last dimension is, I'm calling this helping the right way. This is an interesting and I think sometimes overlooked feature. This is particularly problematic for businesses, but applies to nonprofits and government agencies as well. So the way you want to think about this is that there are two ways in which you relate to each other in many kind of typical day-to-day transactions. This is research that goes back to a whole bunch of anthropologists that have been working on this for many decades. And I'm going to use first a kind of innocuous example, but then you see how it connects. So let's say you and your friends are going out for dinner in a restaurant. And you have a great time. The food is great, the wine is great, the conversation is great. So what you do when you're done is, you put your credit card on the table and then you leave a tip. And that's what we do. That's called an exchange orientation. We are participating in a market transaction where we are receiving, goods and service in order, and then we pay for that. That's a typical exchange transaction. Okay, we provide something, we get paid for that. There's a price, there's supply and demand, etc. Now consider a variant of the model. Now it's the same group of people also having dinner, but they're having dinner at a friend's house. One of them invites everybody's over. Now you had a great time. The wine was good, the conversation was good. And now at the end of the meal, you take your credit card out and put it on the table and you say, I want to leave a 15% tip. That's not the right way to do this, obviously. And people will be aghast and shocked at what you're trying to do. Now, what happened is you misunderstood that you are moved into a community orientation. Community orientation have different rules. You don't pay for goods or services, you participate. There's a sense of, so how do you show your appreciation? You would say, well, next time you come over to my place, or you bring along a bottle of wine, or some flowers, or something along those lines. This is a very highly ritualized way in which you show your appreciation, but you don't pay for it. So that's why, in the United States, people have bake sales where people they don't write a check, they bake a cake, and then that raises money, for the school, because these are rituals that are associated with community orientation. They reinforce a sense of community. So community orientations are characterized not by an exchange of goods and services for money, but by everybody participating personally and equally for the common good. And what that means, it's driven by need and by necessity. It is not driven by supply and demand and by price. So it's absolutely essential that you understand when you are on one and the other. And what happens in a pandemic or a natural disaster is we're shifting from an exchange orientation to a community orientation. Okay, that's key. So to give you one example, it's perfectly appropriate for Starbucks to charge a police officer $3 for a bottle of water during regular times, but not after 9/11. So there was a famous case where Starbucks still charged police officers or first responders when they tried to get water for them. No, we're in a community orientation now where we participate and we volunteer and we give things for free. So this becomes relevant in terms of like, how do we help, or what I call it here, helping the right way. So helping the right way is when you're on a community orientation, there's a paradigm for how we think about the right helper. And I call this here in reference to the well-known story from the New Testament, from the Bible, the Good Samaritan principle. So the Good Samaritan, if you haven't read the Bible in a while, here it is, right? There's a victim on the road, the Good Samaritan, even though he's kind of considered an outcast, participates in that and helps the victim. So the key components are competent and caring. Competent and caring, okay? So you have to know what you're doing, but you have to do it in a way that re-emphasizes the emotional connection to the community. It can't be cold. The more personal, the better. So it's not about sending a check, it's about being there and participating in person, much more effective. The connection to your core competency or your key mission is much less important. So to put it differently, if you're working for an institution that does something or provides some services that are not so relevant right now, that's okay. Set them aside and do what's needed. So if you work for a beauty care company, you do not want to send out skin sanitizer. You want to send moisturizers right now. That's not useful. But if you have something that provides gloves, or in person, you can do something that supports what's happening in the community, much more useful. And then this is a very important piece. And I've emphasized this before, don't forget about your own team. So your team, your people will be stressed out, they will be worried, they may be overworked, they will be concerned for their own life and the life of their loved ones. So we sometimes forget about the well-being and the mental state of our own team because our focus is mission-driven. I want to get one example where I think this was very pronounced and very clear. You can watch this in the movie Apollo 13. So Apollo 13 was a lunar mission that went wrong. And at some point there was a question about how do they get the astronauts back to Earth. They were running out of oxygen. A very dramatic film with Tom Hanks, you know, as like the pilot there and all of that. But there's a critical moment, and the critical moment occurs when they literally don't know how to get them down without them running out of oxygen first. And this is at NASA ground control. And the head of NASA walks into the ground control center and is clearly in a state of frenzy, in a state of panic. And his comment is, or his expression is, this will be the worst moment in the history of NASA. And he walks up to the head of ground control. The head of ground control is kind of like the hero of the movie. He's played by Ed Harris. And in the movie, if you've seen the movie, he wears like a white vest. And whenever he makes a decision, he kind of pulls on his white vest. And so the head of NASA comes in, makes that statement. And then Ed Harris says, with all due respect, sir, this will be a proudest moment. So the way you want to think about this is that this is a moment that you and your team and the people that work for you will tell their grandkids about. And it's a moment where you can leave a legacy as a team, as an organization, and as a leader. And you want to embrace that. You want to embrace that this is, as tough this is for everybody, this is a moment to shine. This is a moment to show everybody what we're made of. Once you do that, a lot of things come together. One is it creates a sense of empathy and commitment. We saw that from the trust side. Second, it gives people a sense of agency, so their sense of fear goes down. And third, it reinforces the sense of community, of pulling together, of all for one in this critical moment that gives people a sense that they're doing something meaningful, that they're making a difference, and that they're helping their community. And that's what they're hungry for. I want to conclude this with one example, which is from an unlikely source, but which I think is one of the best examples that I know for the Good Samaritan in action, which was Walmart's response after Hurricane Katrina. And to be clear, at that time, Walmart was heavily criticized for its business practices and was under a lot of attack from both environmental and labor activists. But Walmart was able to really step up during the Katrina crisis and give their own people a strong sense of pride and purpose that carried over for certainly for the next few years. So what Walmart was able to do, it was able to utilize its strength in supply chain and logistics in bringing water and much needed food and shelter to the cut-off communities after Hurricane Katrina. And so they planned this very carefully. They had like logistics centers, which they moved around, mobile logistics centers or clusters that they moved around in response to the hurricane's trajectory. And then after the hurricane hit, they were able to supply people within 24 hours. FEMA, it took 4 to 5 days to get there. So they outperformed the federal government by about 4 days. That's number one. But how did they do that? Well, they were able to redeploy that. So they embraced the community orientation. But very importantly, what the CEO said is he told his people, these are extraordinary times and I will expect extraordinary things from you. Now, what that means is that you have something to contribute and will empower you to do that. So that meant, for example, is that they allowed their line managers, people in a store or that were involved in delivering goods to the stores, to make decisions that they usually would not be allowed to. For example, famously, one store manager broke into the pharmacy in order to supply diabetic patients with much needed diabetic medication. Now, that is not what we usually do. But what the CEO said, extraordinary, expect extraordinary thing, and I trust you to make the right calls. I trust you to make the right calls. We all expect you to step up, and we trust you to do that. And then the last piece of that, they allowed these line managers to tell their stories directly to the media. Again, usually you would never want to do that. You would want to make sure that there's a PR person and all of that, but not in these circumstances. So here are 2 quotes that came directly out of stories that were shared by 2 Walmart employees. The first one, you see that it broke my heart to see them like this. They were my kids' teachers. They were on my kids' sports teams. They were my neighbors. Notice the community orientation. She is thinking about these people no longer as their customers. They think about as members of the community and acts and communicates accordingly. The truck driver, when I arrived, it sounded like somebody scored a touchdown in a football game. I could have sat there and shook hands all day. They were so happy to see me. Look, for this person, this will be the most important moment of his professional life. He will not be proud of anything he's ever done than this. But they had to be empowered to do this. They had to be brought together as an organization to step up during these critical moments. So, as difficult and as challenging as these times are, you as leaders can have a tremendous impact of how your own people and your constituencies will get through this and will come out of this. But you have to understand that these are unusual times, what makes them unusual, and act accordingly. So we've discussed today 3 different dimensions of how today is different than any other day. You've seen some tools about how to do that, and you've seen some specific things that you can do as a leader. So the more you can embrace the sense of opportunity, the sense of leaving a legacy, the sense of stepping up, the sense that this is our moment to shine, the more effective you will be in this particular environment. So I'm going to stop now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then we're going to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Daniel. Please, everyone, just a reminder that you should type your questions directed to me, to Terry Brady, in the chat room. Here's a first question for you, Daniel. In creating communications during a crisis, how do you think about the balance between optimism and realism in approaching this topic? And how do you decide how much data to give to people? And maybe if you could comment on what you see is going on with regard to the current crisis, maybe with the White House. Yes. Very good question. So this is, as I said before, one of the things that makes this situation particularly challenging is the lack of information.
but people are hungry to hear from you. So what I would do in this particular case is something that I've seen before, and I've seen to be very effective. There's a combination of being totally realistic and not pulling punches. So do not sugarcoat it. Do not give people a false sense of hope, but be totally realistic and be totally confident and optimistic at the same time. Okay. And the best example, I think, in history of where I've seen that is to look back at Churchill's speeches during the onset of the Second World War, the beginning of the Battle of Britain, when Britain stood alone and was, looking at a Nazi invasion and, of course, the attacks on Britain. So he was at the same time, it was blood, sweat, and tears, the sacrifices that people will do, but there was a sense about a sense of purpose and a sense that we will get through this, and this will be our proudest moment. So a bunch of things like that, I think, that are very effective. If you want to look at two examples where I think two leaders did this quite effectively, one of them was German Chancellor Merkel. And now you have to read it in German, unfortunately, so it's not can't help you with that. But there was a clear sense of realism, how tough this is, very personal. She was not talking about just statistics, but she said, many of us will lose loved ones, and it will be depend on everybody's actions how big the loss will be. And then a sense of kind of, if we work together as this, we can get through this. So that's my sense. So what's not working and really irritating to people is to be sugarcoating, to be overly optimistic. Then you have to backtrack, then you have to change that. That will undermine your credibility quite a bit. People know that this is serious. You can be direct. You can also tell them what you know and what you don't know. That's okay. But combine the idea of being realistic and candid with a sense of hope and with a sense of purpose. That, I think, works the best in these circumstances.
Right. So one of our attendees has asked this question: if you could comment on the 4 areas of the trust radar and how they apply to the leadership that's being shown by President Trump and Governor Cuomo, or perhaps some other leaders within this crisis right now.
Yeah, so I think I think by when you look at this, Governor Cuomo, I think has in some sense stepped up as one of the governors that has been, I think, most effective with dealing with these types of challenges. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy over how President Trump has been handling this. There's a little bit of an overlay here that I think is important for us to keep in mind, is that that's a partisan overlay. Okay, and that is not anything that most of you will have to deal with, at least not to the same level. So here's what I mean by that. So for example, you may say, well, I'm looking at what President Trump is doing. That doesn't sound too much like the trust radar to me, but his approval ratings are up, right? And well, so what do we make of that? The 2 comments here. The first one is, there's a well-known phenomenon in this situation which is called rally around the flag. Is that during crisis, approval rating of president tend to go up. George W. Bush, who was not very popular at the time, his approval ratings after 9/11 went up almost 40 percentage points. So you would expect a bounce, and then we can argue until, for a very long time whether this should be higher or lower for Trump or whatever it is. So that's piece 1. But the second piece, I think, is more important, which is that in a partisan context, particularly when people are very, very wedded to a particular group identity, I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat, for example, what happens in this case is what the psychologists call motivated reasoning. So what does that mean? That means that when you hear, and once you have pledged your loyalty to a team, and now challenging information comes in, people, A, don't seek out the challenging information. They don't believe it. They find reasons against it, and they're pushed back. So the best example to me, non-political example, is in sports. So if you're a fan of, my apologies to the international crowd here, but I'm going to use a US example here. If you are a fan of the New England Patriots, And you remember a few years ago, there was allegations about the Deflategate, that Tom Brady had manipulated or had at least knowingly used a football that wasn't properly inflated. And you're New England Patriots fans, and you hear this story. Here's what you're not doing. People are not saying, "Oh my God, that was terrible. Now I lost all my faith in the New England Patriots, and I'm gonna become a New York Giants fan." That's not the way people react. People react by saying, "Oh, that's not true. Everybody's doing it. He probably didn't know about it. It didn't make a difference." These are all reasons to basically undercut the relevance of this information. Okay, so motivated reasoning, it means, is that you're not taking information at face value, but you're treating the information in a way that is consistent with your sense of group identity, and this particular identity of being a Patriots fan. So what happens in political context, information that is threatening or that comes from the other side is dismissed as partisan, is not sought out, and people actually sometimes, when they hear this information, it reinforces their sense of being a Democrat or Republican. So in highly polarized environments, or whenever people's group identities are threatened, be careful, because this other process is at place, and that very much runs counter to everything that we've seen before. But just to be clear again, if you're running a school or a nonprofit, or you're involved in a government agency that has a broad sense of support, that's not caught in these partisan battles, the types of factors that we've talked about just a few minutes ago are going to be first and foremost.
Right. So we have another question here from an attendee, and this person is asking, what communication channels do you suggest, especially for organizations that typically interact with their customers in person? He, I guess, has gotten countless emails from companies on their COVID responses and ignores most of them. What other options do you think might be more effective?
So that's true. I mean, the email is the common one. The bottom line is, the more personal you can make it, the better. Okay. So I've seen this now, just to give you one example. It's not a corporate example, but it's one that is near and dear to my heart. So many universities have decided to postpone or cancel their commencements, their graduation ceremonies. That is a very, very emotional thing for people. You do not want to send this by email, okay? So what I found much more effective, and I've seen this now in a couple of universities, one great example I think was Washington University. Andrew Martin there, who I know well, I think did a very nice job there, is to record a video. And what you see is it becomes more personal, and you could see his emotional distress, how sad he was for his graduating seniors, that they will not have a commencement at this point. Makes it much more personal, much more direct. If you can do it through a phone call, or now of course we have Zoom and other ways of interacting, the more personal you can make it, the better. That's the overall. Of course, you can't do it with everyone, but everyone can record a little video. That's easy, and this is something that makes a big difference, particularly for big deals, not for standard updates or anything like that, but when you have to make a decision that really affects your community. The more personal you can make it, the better.
So this crisis has been going on and looks like it's going to go on a little bit longer. How do strategies for dealing with crisis change when the crisis might be of longer duration and information and recommendations are really changing very rapidly?
Yeah, so that's of course correct. This will go on. This has been going on for a long time and will go on for a long time. So the important piece here is that the communication needs to be ongoing, and it needs to make updates as things evolve. So the hunger for information and the hunger for updates for leadership will not diminish. So you want to keep that going on as things are. People want to hear from their people. They want to be reassured. There's another piece here I think that you want to think about. This goes beyond just the communication aspect, and has to do with how do we think about it more from an operational point of view as well. I mean, I think we see this already, is that it forces us to work differently. It forces us to interact differently. It creates, if you will, a different ecosystem in which we can operate. All of us, I think, that are under these, stay-at-home rules had to learn how to work remotely and to have our team interact through, whether it's like video conferencing or calls or anything like that. Now, once you have to do it and you can't just meet in person, of course, you realize that maybe there's something here that's interesting, right? So, this is an example, these webinars that we're doing that I'm not sure we would have offered regularly, but because this is so much now the way we're connecting, it made sense. It's natural. It's not the same thing as being in the room together. It's not as interacting, but on the other hand, it allows us to, connect across countries, across time zones, in a very quick and informal way. So I think one thing you want to ask yourself also is, okay, I have to get through this. I have to deal with the challenges, but how do I come out of this stronger? Are there things that we learn from this? Are there ways we can operate? Are there new opportunities that we didn't conceptualize, that we never thought about, and that now open themselves up because we had to? And now we can see, well, in regular times, can we use this as well? Can we work differently? Are there opportunities, channels where we can use people or reach people in a particular way that we couldn't before? That is very interesting, I think. So I think this is, you need to do with the urgent, you need to do with the survival, you need to do with the crisis, but there's also a more long-term impact. So I want to give you an example of this that made this very vivid for me, that I always kind of carry with me. After the 2008-2009 crisis, the AIG was run by Ed Liddy. Ed Liddy had been the former CEO of Allstate, and he took over AIG during the financial crisis, ran it for a year or a couple of years and it was the question, was it going to go bankrupt every day? And what Ed Liddy told me is that he had in his coat pockets, in his coat, he had two cards. One card was the 10 things he had to do today to make sure the company is still alive tomorrow. And then on the other hand were the things, what do I want to do so that we can have a broader time horizon, that we come out of this stronger and thriving. So try to keep these two cards, mental cards, with you, so that you're not completely occupied by the today and by the now, but also look for opportunities where down the line you can do things differently, more impactful, you can reach more people, you can work more efficiently. All these types of things, I think, are now on the table, and we're experiencing them, I think, very directly and very profoundly personal. And that may challenge some of our assumptions that have guided the way we have been doing our work for many years.
Yeah, right. So another attendee has a question about reevaluating priorities in light of COVID-19. She says, how can you continue to advocate for the importance of your product, your issue, et cetera, while showing empathy for what's going on in the current situation?
I think what you want to do is that it depends a little bit on what you do. So there are certain things I think that are, where it's a little difficult right now is to stay relevant. Okay, so if you are like you have a particular thing that's nice to have for people, but it's not essential. Try to push for the relevance. I think is inappropriate. Okay, so I don't know. You run like a nail studio right now, and yes, it's nice to have a manicure, but not essential. Let's say, right? I have to be careful here, but it's like it may be something that we can live, with for another month without. No, don't try. You don't want to try to make that super relevant. And then much better is to do something else and to connect or to try to make a contribution in another way, because you have something that can be leveraged, a capacity or something, a service or just something you can do for other purposes, or because there's just like you have people that can be deployed in different ways. So I wouldn't push that too much. I think that can backfire. Much better than it to just do something, as I said before, in a community way that's directly helpful.
Right, good advice. So somebody else is wondering, how do you keep the messages of your team aligned during a crisis like this? It's going on for a long time, and probably be good to comment on what's going on coming out of the White House right now.
Yeah, so the clearer you are, what your purpose, what your values are, and how you think about that, the better. So so I think that, you know, this is hard to do now, but it can happen too. It can help clarify what we are about, what we stand for, who we are as a group, what do we support. That's useful. The other thing that I would do is to have just some key themes. So the themes that I've highlighted, a couple of different things, and I think is important, is a sense of realism, you know, of kind of a sense of like telling people what you know, what you don't know, and to follow up. One, a sense of empathy. Three, a sense that this is the moment to shine, right? And the fourth is a sense of the community pulling together. Now, these particular themes will manifest themselves in different contexts in different ways, but highlighting them and reinforcing them is what people need to know in these situations. So I think recognize, you know, what the challenges are of this particular decision context. I mentioned some of them, and then reinforce that, because it's easy for people to slip. It's easy for people to be overwhelmed by the lack of information. It's easy for people to be overwhelmed by the fear. It's easy for people, you know, not to fully understand how the situation that they're dealing with right now requires a different mindset than the business as usual. So you're gonna need to reinforce that as a leader, because it's not natural to people. And because it's not natural to people, they may slip back to their own emotional state that may not be as effective, or to business as usual.
Right. So, Professor Diermeier, you've noted in previous articles that in crisis situations, people are paying attention. It's as if the leaders and organizations are on stage. Our former mayor, Rahm Emanuel, was always known for saying, never let a crisis go to waste. What are ways we can use a crisis like this to create positive change longer term?
Yes, I think this is our last question. So it's a great
Yes,
question to wrap up.
It is our last question.
A great question to wrap up. And there's like, there are two ways in which you can read this question, and they're both correct. The first one is related to what I said before, is that during a crisis, you are on stage and you as leaders are on stage. So your legacy will largely be shaped by how you act in this particular context, because people rarely ever will pay attention to you to the same degree as to this one. So that's one piece. That's the way in which people will form the impression of you. The second piece, and I think that's how Rahm meant it, is that you know, that there's also operational aspects that one can think about. And I think there are two pieces here. One piece is that you may have to make some tough calls. So and they're going to be difficult, and they're going to have severe impact on people. So you want to be thoughtful about it, but you don't want to flinch either. This is a moment where you have to make decisions that will have negative consequences. You know, if you have to reduce staff, for example, extremely difficult, extremely painful. But if you don't do it, the entire organization may be at risk. So be empathetic, be clear, communicate in the right way, connect people with people as a person, treat them fairly, but what has to be done has to be done. And then the last piece connected to that, I would say, is that we are right now forced to operate in a different way. Think about crisis also as innovation under pressure. It's something where we have to innovate. We have to be able to do something. And if you have a team that is able to do that, that stays focused, and that you know, that realizes that this is a moment to shine, very often new things can come out of that then make an organization more effective, more impactful in the long run. So watch out for these things. Watch out for these things where you're saying, why didn't we do that before? Or, oh, if we scale that up, that's interesting. So watch out for these moments, which is kind of like, Ed Lady's second card, because this is a very unique environment and it will test you and your organization in unique ways. So see what you can learn from that and take these lessons forward if hopefully we're going to come out on the other side of the stronger.
Right, terrific. I want to thank you so much, Daniel, for your insightful presentation and for sharing your insights today with us, with our Harris community. I know your time is very much in demand right now as a crisis management expert. So on behalf of everybody listening and our team at Harris, we extend our deep appreciation to you for helping us here. And I want to thank also our senior leadership team at Harris and everybody on the Harris team who work very hard every day to bring programming to everyone. And also to our fabulous Harris alumni, we appreciate you being here. And to everybody in the audience, we send you our best wishes for your health. So please stay safe and stay connected. Thanks so much.
Thank you all the best to you.